Carolina is recognized for any questions he may have.
I don't have any questions. I echo what Thomas said. This has been very informative. It really has on both sides. Mr. Goose, everybody here has added value. And Mr. McGovern, your questions are really pertinent, and I enjoyed hearing this debate. You know, I don't know of anything more important than what we're doing here. It involves money. It involves spending. And Matt, I think you're probably right. Getting to this point is going to force some things. You're not going to see from the Republican side, you won't see us in this box again because they know we've got the power to, or got the stickability to do it. I'm reminded of Thomas Edison when he's asked, don't you consider yourself a failure because you failed 1,000 times? He said, no, my experiments just didn't work 1,000 times. And what we've done, the wrong road we've been down, hasn't worked, evidenced by $32 trillion that none of us here are willing to accept. Now, how we get there is going to be the question, but we're willing to work on it and stay here. And I'm like all of y'all, we'll stay here all night long. It doesn't matter until we get it worked out. Now, timing ain't good, as you said. Well, both of you, Mr. McGovern, Mr. Goose, it's not good. But because what's in my mind, we got a national crisis on this border. We've got a national security crisis with this border. And that bothers me. When you have close to 8 to 10 million people in this country, we don't know anything about them, that's a crisis. And getting voting cards and Social Security numbers, that's a crisis. That's a weight that I feel, particularly now. But
would the gentleman yield just quickly?
Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for your comments. I feel I want to add this in defense of the much maligned Appropriations Committee. Everybody here seems to forget for 10 years the Appropriations Committee not only held from fiscal year 2010, fiscal year 2019, go to 19, you'll find the military budget smaller than it was in 2010 and the non-defense numbers lower than it was in fiscal year 2010. So that we actually did, and that was under Republican control. The drivers, as always, I mean, this is really important. I have no dispute with anything anybody's got to say. I think this has been healthy and good. But Congress really wants to get serious about spending, then we need to start talking to people on Ways and Means and E&C, because 60% of money's in 3 programs. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, about 10% on interest and national debt. You got 30% left. A little bit over half of that is defense, which, Republicans usually want to increase as opposed to decrease, and I actually agree with that judgment. My good friend, Mr. McGovern, might not. But I just say that because, again, we need to do this process exactly as has been outlined here. But if you're an appropriator, you say, we did that for 10 years, waiting for those other committees to do their job. And in that 10-year period, non-discretionary spending went from 1.9 to 3.2 trillion dollars. We actually had the largest, most rapid decline in the deficit from about $1 trillion in 2010 down to under 500 billion in about a 6 or 7 year period. I sat on the budget committee at that time, and exactly what our CBO told us happened. When you get to that point, because people are retiring at 10,000 a day, turning 65, not necessarily retiring, that curve's going to start going right back up if you don't do something in these other areas. And I'm not presuming to say what that should be. I'm not on those committees, but the Appropriations and it will continue to try and do its job. But if we think we're going to find the solution to the spending problem in the Appropriations Committee, they don't control enough of the budget to do it. So when our friends from E&C and Ways and Means come here, let's all make sure they understand you're not just here to, increase entitlement programs, which both parties have done, or, cut taxes, which only one party's really done much of that. You guys got to do your part if you really want a balanced budget. And those committees, which are part of our Congress, our colleagues, have not done their job. And I shouldn't say those committees. We have not, as a Congress, done our job in those areas. And so Again, I'm happy to have the debates over spending. I think they're good, and you can always find something to cut in every one of these appropriations bills, in every one. But they are nickels and dimes to the dollars that are in the others. And I've seen very few bills that have been introduced by anybody on either side of the aisle that result in the reduction or reform or whatever, or even additional revenue into. There are some, actually. I think our friend from Connecticut has got a Social Security reform bill. It's a lot more money than I would do, but oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm going right. John. Yes, Larson. Thank you. I'm sorry. I should have remembered because he did put money on the table. So I shouldn't have interrupted you to do that. I just, we're talking a lot about one area, and it's very important. And it's actually the easiest one for all of us to get our fingers around and into. Because, again, we just, there was a time when Congress decided whether or not there was going to be an increase in the Social Security check. And we gave that up long before any of us were in Congress back in the 1970s. So we've turned over a lot of control ourselves just because it's politically convenient to avoid the decisions there. And when we get back to that, I think we'll be back on the right road in terms of reversing some of these things. So anyway, you're very kind to have allowed me to intrude in your time. I appreciate my friend from South Carolina allowing me to do that.
No, and I appreciate Chairman Cole. And that's some of the conversation I had with August Pfluger, with Michael Waltz. I was looking at the DOD budget, and I was going down the line. I said, particularly with August, I said, August, how do we avoid these $500 hammers? That's a big number. And he said, that's a good point. I said, I know you want to get back to building ships, airplanes, missiles. He said, yeah, and that's where the commission came up that, frankly, McCarthy had brought up. Same thing with Michael Waltz. He said, we're in danger right now because we couldn't fight a war if we had to. But you're talking about Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. That's the next gorilla that we're going to have to. And I think because of this group, I think we'll be doing that. We've got to. I mean, we're wasting our time if we just think this minuscule part of what we're talking about, 25% at best, when you include the military and transportation. So I agree with you. But no, thank y'all for your time. This has been a good exercise. You learn a lot. I yield back.
Thank you very much. My good friend from Texas recognized for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to make one comment there about, because I very much agree with the remarks of the chairman about what we're talking about in terms of the percentage of the overall budget and our need to focus on those other areas. I remember pointing out, and I directed it at both parties, when I think it was Mr. Vogt, the director of OMB, was testifying when Trump was president, and I was pointing out that we had no proposal whatsoever from either party about any issue involving Medicare, Social Security, or Medicaid. None. I asked him, well, who's going to be on the steps? What press conference has been held on any of these issues? Because we had people railing about not talking about focusing on some of this funding and focusing on those. But I was like, where are the proposals? When are we going to talk about those things? I'd be happy to. And I think, and as the chairman said, we've talked about that. I'd be happy to. We want to talk about age. We want to talk about reforms. I wish we were doing that, but it's our job to do it. And I think too often we try to protect people's votes, protect people from voting, when in fact we're supposed to vote. So I want to applaud my colleagues here who are making the case for voting, and that we should have amendments, and that we should not be afraid of having votes on amendments on the floor of the House, and that we should move appropriations bills. And I would note that we have processed, I think, 250 amendments on this Homeland Security bill. Could have been more, could have been less. On Homeland alone, there was 250 amendments, and Andy Biggs had 247 of them. But we processed a lot of the amendments, and that's good, and it allows people to have a say. I would point out that I think, as the chairman was noting, that the Appropriations Committee had done its job, I'll put it in very summary speak, for a decade, and kicked out bills that, in the chairman's words, cut spending, or reduce defense year to year, or reduce non-defense year to year, whatever. And but nevertheless, it hit some buzzsaw. And the question is what was that buzzsaw? And I think the buzzsaw that it hit was, to a degree, what my friend from Kentucky was alluding to. I think the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates, and others here at the table have alluded to, that it runs into the just normal process of the machinery around here. We talk about got to have a four corners deal, and the four corners and the leaders, and they get in the room and they say, well, we got to protect this person's seat, and we got to protect this person's seat, and we have this priority. So you guys want defense, we want non-defense, and here we sit, and then we never touch the big issues, the big numbers on the Medicare, Social Security, and now burn pits, and all the other massive mandatory programs that are all on autopilot. And with all due respect to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, we talk about revenue, and again, we can go round and around on it in disagreements. I might actually surprise some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle about how I feel about putting revenue on the table to have an actual conversation about revenue if we're actually going to have a conversation about spending. And I've had that conversation, and happy to have it further. But I would note at the end of the day, we still have roughly as high of a revenue as a percentage of GDP as we've ever been having coming in. Give or take a little. I admit we could put a chart up and debate that. But we all know generally 2000, right after World War II, and then today, it's a percentage of GDP. We're at as high levels we ever had. So maybe you can get more, but we're not going to fix the $33 trillion dollar problem with revenue. We really have to put our arms around spending. So to this point, I very much applaud my colleagues here in how they're hammering the need for us to finish this and get the job done. I would just posit or question real quick. Do my colleagues here testifying believe, or would they be willing to be here all night, every night, from right now through midnight on September 30th?
Absolutely, yes.
To achieve the objective that we need to achieve. Notwithstanding whatever mistakes, whatever faults have occurred to get us to the point we're sitting right now, all water under the bridge. We're sitting here today. Would you be here from this moment right now, all the way through the holiday on Sunday, Monday, all the way through next Saturday?
Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Ms. Bartz?
Well, I'll tell you something. Can I just briefly mention something, and I actually enjoy your committee. I might come here more often, and I will tell you one thing. No, really, because it's actually good deliberation. And I'll tell you something. Actually, something I just thought about, really. We're moving, some of the services appropriations should be considered first, funding national defense, border security. I think we still have extra, as my colleague pointed out, after 14 days, regardless what it is, to move that, to make sure that our Border Patrol does get paid. And our Border Patrol would actually appreciate significantly if we help them to secure the border. But the frustration I've seen from them, I went there many times, it's unacceptable. And I think they would do whatever it takes if we would really back them up and support them. And I think that's something, but we actually have an ability, to pass some of this, and if we work hard, it's for more important appreciation for some of the people that, in the trenches for us, defending our freedom could actually move. It was extra time, and I think that's important. And what my another colleague pointed out, I hope, because honestly, President Biden didn't want to discuss border security. We've proposed the bill as part of, unfortunately, our debt ceiling negotiations. He didn't want to do it, and the same dealing with that. Even didn't want to do a commission. So I really hope that my colleagues here in the House and in the Senate will stand up and say, you know what? We are the branch that's responsible for power of purse and the American people, and we are going to be on a bipartisan basis, regardless who's in charge, to push an executive branch to do the right thing. I actually think that is our job, and American people would love to see some bipartisan in the issues of national security, because I'll be honest with you, our credit rating was downgraded. If you remember why, because they said that the Senate and the House, Congress doesn't even start talking about having a plan. That was the main reason. So I think that will help the economy, the inflation, the American people. That would be such a major step forward, and I hope you will support it and we can get it done.
The gentleman yield?
Sure.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the gentleman's question, how many would be willing to stay here. I think everyone would be, but the reality is we're not. And because none of us have control over the schedule, and it has already been predetermined by your leadership that we're not going to come back until Tuesday. Rules Committee notwithstanding. So again, I mean, it goes back to what Mr. Duguce and I and others were saying, is that we're running out of time, and part of the reason we're running out of time is because a decision was made to give some days away at a very crucial moment, and that's unfortunate. But I appreciate the gentleman's question, and I think if any one of us were in charge, we would be not going home right now.
And I appreciate the sentiment that we should be here. I do believe we should be here. I believe we should have been here in August, but here we are. And so the American people expect us to do our job. To the point of Mr. Massey, to the point of my colleagues here, we should ride this horse and get on it and go and get this done. And whatever disagreements we have, we should process the amendments. I remember one of my earliest times here in the summer of 2019, I forced to vote on about, 60 amendments during appropriations. And I remember one of my colleagues who was kind of mad about it. And then eventually, because we were down on the floor and we were having to figure out what were in the amendments because people hadn't vote wrecked them because they didn't expect the amendments. So we were all down there talking to each other and trying to figure out, well, do you support this and why? You go to the issue expert. And suddenly people were going, well, this isn't so bad, this whole legislating thing. Like, it kind of blew people's mind that you're like on the floor talking about amendments and going, well, what do you think about that issue? It's just, I do think if we could figure out how to, break this down and rebuild it back up in the way that we need to do it, we would be in a much better spot. I'm very much in line with my colleagues here to accomplish that. I'd only note one other thing, which is my colleagues at this table are aware. My additive, not caveat, but my additive perspective on that is the crisis at the border and trying to figure out how to square that circle and get it done. And I've acknowledged my willingness, frankly, to buy with a spending level I might not otherwise support, whatever it would take for my Democratic colleagues to support us in getting the administration to do their job at the border. I would just turn to my friend in particular from Arizona, but any of my colleagues on this point. I just saw breaking news come across my feed here that we're going to be 304,000 encounters is the number. It's a record-breaking number, and it's an extraordinary level of spending level of encounters, and it says here in the story of the Washington Examiner, Biden makes border history with highest illegal crossing attempts in August ever recorded. And so I would just say to my friend from Arizona who knows this issue very well, as the gentleman from Colorado alluded to in questioning you about Border Patrol, and every one of us wanting Border Patrol to be funded, to do their job and get their paychecks, wanting all of the employees we ask to do the job that they should do to be funded and get their paychecks. But I'd ask him if he agrees with me that in addition to the appropriations process, rooting out programs we disagree with, whether it's prostitution ring in Colombia or whatever it is, if you go through the list of things that we have had our funding, it could be $15,000. It's not going to stop the $33 trillion, but it's just crazy. And I would posit that we can't build goodwill among our colleagues to go address the complications of Medicare and Social Security if we're unwilling to go cut a $15,000 program that's absurd, because our constituents go, what are you doing? So I just wonder, my colleague in particular, Arizona, or any of my other colleagues, if you agree with me that there are certain baseline questions that this is all about what we fund and what we should be demanding of the executive branch in the context of the funding. It's not just a dollars and cents tables thing. It's not just figuring out how to balance. That's part of our job that we must do and that we're failing to do. It's actually saying to the administration, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayorkas, I'm just sorry. I cannot give you this dollar if you're going to flout the law. Notwithstanding my disagreement among colleagues, our perspective, if you aren't going to do the job we hired you to do, at least in my perspective, why would I say, sure, here's the money? How does my colleague from Arizona feel about that?
Thank you for the question. I agree with you 100%, which is why both you and I have different versions of Holman amendments on Secretary Mayorkas. But I think the point, if I can drive it home, is that this administration, certainly with regard to the border, has been lawless. And I'll give you one example, and that's the parole. The parole is, Secretary Mayorkas has actually come in and testified that parole is designed to be individual and rarely used. And so prior to Secretary Mayorkas, you averaged about 15 to 20 max per year receiving parole. Last year, over 300,000. This year, on pace to be almost 1 million. 1 million people getting parole. So I believe that with the check that the founders gave us being the checkbook, that we might just have to do something to goad this administration into enforcing the border. And that may mean cutting that $15,000 program that he may want down in Colombia or wherever it is. But you're going to have to do something to inspire or demand enforcement. And I know you've been working on that as well. And so, yes.
And I wonder, I assume the gentleman from Florida might have some comments similarly about the Department of Justice with respect to funding the Department of Justice. And again, I was an assistant United States attorney, and great respect for the vast majority, the lion's share of the line folks who are out there trying to go get bad guys. And they're doing it right now. Sitting there in Texas and San Antonio, I've met with them, and they're going after drug cartel members and gang leaders and people. And they run into, of course, judges that won't, actually give them a sentence. That's a different issue for a different hearing. Do you have thoughts or feelings about sending a blank check to Merrick Garland?
Yeah, I agree with you that the good people that work at the Department of Justice and the FBI are betrayed by the abuses that we've seen, and those abuses would likely be less frequent if we heeded the advice that Ms. Boebert gave us to actually authorize unauthorized programs and to create some guardrails that haven't been created ever for some of those entities at the Department of Justice. And by engaging in this path that we're beginning on with these 4 bills, my hope is that we build sufficient momentum to engage in that programmatic review when we get to the DOJ budget.
Did any of you testify, because I can remember the exact year, as to when the Department of Justice was last authorized? Was that 2009?
The FBI has never been authorized.
Neither has the CDC.
Or
what
the
about
ATF.
What about Homeland Security? When was the last time it was authorized? Do you all remember or no?
Fully reauthorized since its inception.
In 2003.
Yeah, it was created but never fully authorized.
That's correct.
And I think these are the kinds of things that make the American people wonder what's going on. And, I ran into a buzzsaw recently, Mr. Gates will agree with me on this, where I was told on the one hand through the Rules Committee that I was unable to do something on authorization, and then told I was unable to do it on an appropriation. And I'm going, well, just when the hell can I do it? You remember when?
Yeah, no, it reminds me of the great scene from Austin Powers where the guy says there's only 2 things I can't stand: people who are intolerant of other people and the Dutch.
Do you remember the specific matter we're talking about where we were unable?
Yeah, I do recall. It was the back pay for our service members,
right.
And we had sought authorizing language for that, and had been told that it would be best be handled in appropriations, and in appropriations we were told it would be best handled in the authorization. Right. So good news is we've got both in play right now with a conference committee and an appropriations bill, and my suspicion is we probably won't be able to pass both without taking care of those service members.
Well, I appreciate that point. I think it's been important and instructive for the American people to see and hear. It's late, and we've gone through a lot of stuff here. You guys have been here a long time. I appreciate you all. Appreciate my friends for what you're doing and standing up for, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Is there any? Certainly.
I just want to end on actually say something positive about something Mr. Gates is doing that I'm supporting. He has an amendment with you call it cluster bombs, and I think Mr. Massey may be doing something as well. But I mean, these are particularly horrific weapons. We should not be providing them to anybody. This is not just about Ukraine. I support helping Ukraine, but I do not support providing them cluster bombs. The United States should ban them, and just because Russia sends them to people, we shouldn't follow that. But he's got. But I'm looking around here, and we represent kind of a very huge ideological spectrum here. And I think if everybody here were to support this amendment, it might actually pass. So anyway, but I want to thank him for his leadership, and I want to thank Mr. Massey too, who's not here. And thanks, and I yield back.
Oh, thank you very much. Is there anyone else seeking to testify on H.R. 4367 or H.R. 46? Certainly.
Just make an observation. We keep using the term shutdown. It's not a shutdown. Shutdown is what Dr. Fauci did to the economy. This is an appropriations lapse. And there is more money washing around in these agencies.
Can't
It's,
excuse them.
according to the White House, $1.6 trillion that they've got in unobligated funds. It's not necessary for it to be painful. We should still do our work. We should still want to do our work, but let's be careful about our language.
Is there anyone else seeking to testify on H.R. 4367 or 4665? Seeing none, this closes the hearing portion.